David Cameron wrote in an interview with The Sun, which perhaps tells us everything that we need to know, "This is a moment in our history when we have to wake up, sit up and have massive social, political and cultural change." He added, "Stop and search rules were put in place to protect young black and Asian British kids." Well, you might not have seen it quite like that yourself, but of course that's what they were doing all the time. Now it's the young black and British Asian kids that are being stabbed and shot, and the rules are getting in the way of protecting them. Now, I mean, I know David Cameron went to Eton, but I can't really imagine anybody with less knowledge or less understanding of what went on, or what goes on with Stop and Search, because as everybody knows, this isn't about stopping crime. It's not about saying to people who are about to attack somebody else, we're going to stop you doing it. If the police had been able to do that or were able to do that, there wouldn't be the number of violent crimes that go on. Stop and Search is something very, very specific. It is about a form of harassment and intimidation of a group of people, mainly young people, mainly black people and Asian people. That is the point of the operation. And those of us who are older remember the sus laws, and again I'm sure people have talked about these earlier, where people could be picked up on suspicion of being about to commit a crime, going to commit a crime, looking in the jewellers in Oxford Street, which, you know, obviously if you're young and black, you're not doing that to buy your girlfriend an engagement ring, you're doing it because you're about to smash the window and steal things. This was the whole basis of sus. And many people believed, and indeed Lord Scarman, who did the when there was the Brixton riot in 1981, which again the older people will remember, Lord Scarman, who did the inquiry, because the British government are very good at having inquiries long after the event of disasters, although they still haven't had one on the Iraq War, but we're waiting for that. We're waiting for that one. They had an inquiry with Lord Scarman, who said that in his view, and this is a judge, you know, an establishment judge, in his view, the sus laws were a major factor contributing to the riot that took place. Now, they say riots never get you anywhere, and I wouldn't possibly be in favour of advocating anything, but as many people have pointed out, in Brixton after they had the riot, they got all sorts of grants and all sorts of money that was never available to them before. So maybe they took the view that it wasn't a totally negative experience. And I know Tony Benn always says that, you know, pensioners can march, you know, pensioners are always marching for higher pensions. It's only, he says, it's only if they picked up a brick and threw it through a window that they would, that suddenly the press would be full of pensioners' demands and crazy pensioners act violently and all this kind of thing. But I think the point about David Cameron's remarks, which we shouldn't ignore or leave, is that of course they've been followed by Labour. Labour, which nearly always in these cases, are in a bidding war with the Tories to increase the criminalisation of young people. I mean, this is true across all races, but which again particularly hits working class people and black and ethnic minority people, Turkish people, Kurdish people, you know, the whole range of ethnic minorities in London. And it really is an absolute disgrace that this is being posed as in some way helping other black kids, when actually all it's doing is making it much, much harder for the communities to operate in the way they do. And I can only imagine what black and Asian parents feel about their young children these days and how frightened they must be at, you know, this happened when people came here in the 40s and 50s. They faced perhaps more overt discrimination than racism in terms of people couldn't get jobs and houses or meals in restaurants because of the colour of their skin. That did end, or it largely ended. I'm not saying we're totally free from these things, but it largely ended. But we now have the second and third and fourth generation of kids are still treated to this racism and discrimination. And I think the reason I say about Asians as well is because if you look at the figures for stop and search under terror laws, which is very largely Muslims or Muslim-looking people, because we know the Metropolitan Police can't tell the difference between Brazilians and people from Pakistan or Somalia. But In 2001 to 2, which as people will know, 2001 was the year that 9/11 happened and there was the beginning of the war on terror, there were 10,200 stops and searches under the Terrorism Act 2000. By 2004 to 5, there were 35,800 stops and searches under the Terrorism Act. Now that will largely be, I must say the resultant arrests are tiny. Even 2045, 35,800 people stopped, 455 arrested. I don't know from the figures how many charged, but actually most people, even arrested under the terror laws, aren't charged and certainly aren't convicted even if they are charged, as we saw with these young men who were acquitted only last week. Now, if you look at the total number of stop and search, under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, there were, again, in 2045, 851,000 people stopped and searched in total. 11% of them were charged with anything, were arrested and charged with anything. Now, in my view, in a simple person's language, that means 750,000 people were stopped and searched totally unnecessarily. And that is an incredible figure when you think of people, I mean, obviously they're stopped and searched for different reasons, but when you think about this is a massive infringement on people's civil liberties. And I have to say, I think it is about race and class. I don't think it's divorced from these things. I mean, the truth of the matter is, this doesn't happen in Surrey, or not very much. It doesn't happen, partly because these kids have got the money to have their own car and to be driven around and all this kind of thing. It happens in the inner cities. It happens in the poor, deindustrialised areas, in the old mining towns and the mining villages. It happens in all those places. It happens in the places where kids have absolutely nothing to do, where incidentally they live in relatively small houses. And we all know in London, overcrowding is a massive problem. And when your kids don't have their own bedroom and don't have a study where they can do their homework and don't have a games room and don't have all the other things that the richer kids in this society get, then they do go and stand around street corners. And anybody who can remember being a kid, and some people still are, but anybody who knows about this knows this is exactly what people want to do with their time, and it shouldn't be illegal. I mean, you might think it's pointless, you might think it's boring, you might think that kids are the same every generation, you might think all those things. Particularly as you get older, sometimes you think all those kind of things. But it shouldn't be illegal. There is nothing wrong with doing it. If people want to hang out like that, why shouldn't they be able to do it? And being black or Asian, I hope shouldn't need to spell this out, shouldn't be illegal either. Or shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a presumption of guilt. And this is what we've got in this country. If you go to a prison in this country, you see how many young black people in particular in any prison. It is absolutely astonishing. And it's not just in the prisons. If you see who drives the buses, you see who drives the trains, you see who works in the hospitals, you have the same thing. And therefore, this is about the way that the government and the elite in this society, on the one hand, don't deliver all the things that we should get with housing and school and education and hospitals, all these things, and on the other hand, decide that they are going to criminalise a bunch of people. And that is what they're really talking about doing. So therefore I think it's very, very important that we have this meeting tonight, and I'm very, very sorry that I've missed some of it, and I hope obviously that we'll continue the discussion. But I think it's also very, very important that we do not allow in this election, or in any other election, these issues to become issues which the politicians use because they do it in the most cynical and rotten way. We've already seen the way in which the Evening Standard is whipping up racism over the whole question. I mean, my attitude towards corruption and towards these sorts of things, if there is corruption, if there's questions to be answered, they should be answered, and if there's people who should be prosecuted, they should be prosecuted. But to do this on the basis that this is black groups getting money and black people doing these things strikes me as playing to the racist card and doing it in exactly that kind of way. And that seems to me as something that we should reject, and that we should make sure that race is an issue in this election, but not in the way they want race to be an issue, but race should be an issue in the sense that we say we are standing up against racism. Respect stands for everybody being equal, no discrimination towards anybody, no police stop and search, and no attempt to criminalise young Asian and black boys in particular. And I think if that is one of the things that we campaign on, we can do very, very well in the election. But I think it shouldn't just be about the election. We also have to campaign around this question, because otherwise we are going to consign another generation of young people to a form of discrimination and intimidation which really is not acceptable in the 21st century. That's why we have to oppose these attempts by Cameron and by Gordon Brown to roll the clock back.